The sky over Germany was the color of cold steel the morning the crew of Lucky Lily climbed aboard, a shade that felt more like a warning than weather. The B-17F sat on the frostbitten airfield like a slumbering giant, streamers of exhaust drifting around her as ground crew performed their final checks. Staff Sergeant Daniel "Denny" Rourke, tail gunner, tightened the last strap on his heated suit as he approached the bomber's tail. He always came to this spot first. The tail was his world, his kingdom, his coffin, depending on the day. On the fuselage near the tail, the crew chief had painted the emblem months ago. A red lily in full bloom, petals curling outward as if opening to fire. Denny would tap the flower twice before every mission. Today his gloved fingers lingered longer than usual. He didn't know why. Strange unease knotted in his gut, a feeling that something waited for them beyond the horizon. Some unseen consequence of flying into the heart of the Reich one time too many. Lieutenant Jack Mercer. The pilot stood near the nose with his flight jacket half-zipped. He was young, barely 22, but he carried the weight of command in his posture alone. His eyes met Denny's across the tarmac, and he raised a hand. It wasn't a wave it was more like reassurance, a silent signal they'd grown used to. Jack was steady, always steady, the kind of man who smiled for the crew even when his hands trembled in the cold. Denny walked beneath the wings and into the belly of the bomber where the men already shuffled through last-minute checks. Sam O'Leary, the Irish-born waist gunner, grinned at him with a mouthful of chewing gum. "Rourke, you ready to freeze your ass off in that tin can back there?" he called. Denny smirked. "It's warmer than listening to you complain all day." Sam cackled and tossed him a chocolate bar. "In case you need something sweet to think about when the Jerry fighters come knocking." The intercom crackled as Jack's voice filled the fuselage. "Crew, take your stations. We're wheels up in 5. The tone was calm, practiced, but today it carried an undertone that none of them quite recognized. Denny crawled through the narrow fuselage toward the tail, his knees brushing cold aluminum. The vibrations of the engines building beneath him as the propellers roared to life. The tail compartment was cramped, just enough room for the guns, the seat, the small window of sky behind him. He clipped his harness, pulled the twin .50 calibers toward him, and settled into the strange solitude he had grown to know too well. As Lucky Lily lifted from the ground and joined the tight diamond formation of the 347th Bomb Squadron, Denny watched the English countryside fall away. Soon clouds swallowed everything, and the world became nothing but engine noise and the faint smell of oil. Hours passed, the sun climbed, Germany approached. The first trouble came long before they saw enemy fighters, the flak. Black bursts erupted around the formation like blooming night flowers, each detonation shivering through the bomber's frame. "Jesus, they're awake today," muttered Sam over the intercom. "Wakefulness isn't the issue," replied Morris, the bombardier, his voice tight. "The issue is they're getting better at guessing our altitude." Concussive blast punched the left side of the formation. A B-17 ahead of them fell out of place, smoke trailing from its wing before it dropped into a spiral. No parachutes emerged. Another blast rocked Lucky Lily, rattling Denny so hard his headset slipped. He jammed it back on. "Tail to pilot. That one felt close," he said. "Close is fine," Jack replied, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. "Hit is bad, so let's not do that." A brief chuckle moved through the intercom, but it carried no real humor. The next moment, the flak stopped as if a switch had been thrown. The silence was unnerving, too sudden to complete. Denny looked out into the distant sky and saw them specks at first, then wings, then full shapes. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high," he yelled. The formation tightened, guns bristling like the quills of a threatened animal. The German fighters came fast, diving with the sun at their backs. FW-190s sleek, deadly, painted with black crosses that looked like slashes across the sky. Denny fired first. Tracers streaked from his guns in glowing arcs. The fighters fanned out, splitting into 2 groups. One dove directly toward Lucky Lily, cannons spitting fire. The tail shook violently as rounds hammered the fuselage. "I'm hit. I'm okay, just grazed," Denny shouted, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring them or himself. The 190 screamed past him, close enough that Denny briefly saw the pilot's face, a flash of pale skin, goggles, and a snarl. Sam's voice cut through the chaos. Right waist to all one down. Smoked the bastard. But the victory was short-lived. More fighters swarmed, slicing through the formation like wolves isolating prey. Then came the hit that changed everything. A burst of cannon fire from an FW-19. Coming head-on at the formation ripped through the mid-tail joint of Lucky Lily. To Denny, it felt like being inside a bell struck by a giant hammer. The tail compartment lurched, twisted, then a horrific cracking sound tore through the bomber. Denny's stomach dropped. He knew that sound. He'd heard it once before on a crippled fortress that never made it home. The tail was breaking away. "Pilot, this is tail. We're hit hard." "Something's wrong, I'm losing control," Denny shouted. Jack's voice came back instantly. "Denny, stay with me." "What's the damage?" But before Denny could reply, the tail section groaned like tortured meadowland, then separated completely from the main fuselage. There was no warning. One moment, Denny was part of a flying fortress. The next, he was in freefall, plummeting through open sky in a detached tail assembly spinning violently. He heard no screams, no engines, no intercom, just the deafening roar of air. The world outside blurred into streaks of blue and gray. Denny's harness yanked tight as he slammed against the side of the tail compartment. His .50 cal guns jerked. His legs tangled in loose cables and shards of metal whipped past him. He tried to reach his parachute, but the spinning force pinned his arms. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Panic surged like ice water through his veins. He thought of his mother back in Illinois, of Sundays at the diner, of the letter he never finished writing. He thought of Jack and the crew still fighting above. He thought of the ground approaching too quickly, but the tail didn't tumble straight down. The rear stabilizer, bent but not entirely destroyed, caught the wind and transformed the fall into a gliding spiral, barely controlled, but enough to slow the descent. Denny's vision tunneled. He fought to stay conscious as gravitational forces pressed him into the metal. He managed to brace one foot against the frame, pushing himself upright enough to reach the emergency flap. His hands shook uncontrollably, but he finally grabbed the parachute clasp. A violent jolt threw him sideways before he could attach it. The tail smashed through a cloud layer, emerging into a patchwork of fields and forests below. Growing larger with terrifying speed, Denny took a breath, a real deep breath, and clipped the chute into place. He crawled toward the rear hatch, but the tail compartment rolled again, slamming him backward. He tasted blood. The hatch was stuck, warped from the attack. He kicked it. Once, twice on the third kick, the panel bent outward. Wind tore it open, nearly pulling him into the void. He held on with both hands, boots hanging out over open air. The earth rushed toward him like a rising tide. He knew he had only seconds. The final desperate push, he hurled himself out of the falling tail. He tumbled into freefall. The air screamed around him, ripping tears from his eyes. He scrambled for the ripcord, fingers numb and refusing to obey. He forced his hand down again, grabbed the cord pulled. The parachute exploded open above him with a bone-jarring snap, yanking him upward as the tail of Lucky Lily slammed into the ground somewhere behind him with a distant, thunderous crash. Denny hung in the silence that followed, drifting slowly toward the snow-dusted fields of Germany. He hit the ground hard, rolling through dirt and frost until he lay still. Every bone felt bruised, but nothing seemed broken. He laughed, a wild, breathless sound of disbelief. He had lived. Against all odds, he had lived. But the moment of relief evaporated when voices echoed from a nearby ridge. German soldiers shouting as they approached the crash site. Denny scrambled to his feet, unclipped the chute, and staggered toward the forest. His legs wobbled, but adrenaline drove him forward. He looked up once, toward the sky where Lucky Lily had vanished into battle, and whispered, "Come home, boys. Just come home." Behind him, the soldiers saw movement and raised their rifles. Denny ran without direction or plan, crashing through the underbrush as branches tore at his flight suit and icy mud splashed beneath his boots. The German voices rose behind him, sharp, commanding, relentless. He didn't dare look back. Every instinct told him that if he hesitated even for a heartbeat, he would feel a rifle round tear through his spine. The forest swallowed him in cold shadows. the gray winter light filtering down in weak, fractured beams. His breaths came ragged, each inhale burning like fire in his lungs. He ducked behind a fallen tree, pressing himself into the earth as the voices drew closer. He could hear boots crunching frozen leaves, hear the metallic clatter of rifles being readied. One soldier shouted something in German close enough that Denny felt the vibration of it in the air. He squeezed his eyes shut, gripping the small emergency pistol in his pocket, though he knew it was worthless against a patrol. Minutes passed. The boots moved left, then right, then faded. The Germans had followed the path of the fallen tail section. They were searching the crash site, not the forest. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from his muscles one painful inch at a time. He rose to a crouch and forced himself deeper into the woods. His hands trembled violently, not from the cold, but from the shock still crashing through his nerves. He had survived a mid-air breakup. He had survived free fall. But he was behind enemy lines with no map, no radio, and no crew. He touched the pocket where he kept a folded photo of them, feeling the shape of it through the fabric. He wondered if they were alive, if Lucky Lily had made it home, or if she, too, had been swallowed by the sky. Hours blurred as he moved through the forest, keeping out of sight of roads and villages. Twice, he heard distant engines and froze beneath the trees, watching German trucks rumble along dirt paths. He had no food, no water, and the cold gnawed at him relentlessly. By late afternoon, he reached a small creek trickling through the forest. He knelt and splashed water onto his face, the freezing liquid shocking him awake. His reflection rippled blood on his temple, soot on his cheeks, eyes hollowed by fear and exhaustion. He barely recognized himself. A rustle behind him made him spin. He reached for his pistol. "Don't," came a voice, soft, accented, but in English. Denny froze. From behind a cluster of trees stepped a young woman wearing a wool coat and carrying a satchel. Her dark hair was pulled back, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She raised her hand slowly, showing she meant no harm. "You are American," she said in a whisper. "From the flying fortress?" Denny's heart pounded. "Who are you?" he asked. She stepped closer. "My name is Elise. I live in the village just beyond the hills. I saw the tail fall this morning. I thought, maybe someone survived." Her eyes flicked to his torn uniform. "And you did." He didn't know whether to trust her. For all he knew, she could be a collaborator or bait to lure him into captivity. But her voice carried no malice, only urgency. And he had no other chance. "Are there Germans nearby?" he asked. "Always," she replied, glancing toward the village. "More every day. But if they find you, you will not survive the night." She extended a hand. "Come with me. We must move before they begin another search." Denny hesitated only a moment before nodding. He tucked the pistol away and followed her through a maze of hidden paths. Elise moved quickly, clearly familiar with the forest. She led him to a small hunting cabin camouflaged beneath pine branches. Inside, it was dim, but warmer than the open air. A small lantern flickered on a table. Denny collapsed onto a wooden bench. Elise reached into her satchel and handed him a piece of bread and a small bottle. "Eat slowly," she said, "and drink. Not too much at once." He didn't argue. The bread felt like heaven between his teeth. "You risked a lot coming out here," he said after a moment. Elise shrugged. "War makes risk normal." She studied him for a long second. "How did you survive the fall?" Denny shook his head. "Dumb luck, I guess. The tail didn't go straight down. I bailed out just in time." Lisa's expression softened. "Then maybe luck is not finished with you." The hours passed quietly. Outside, the winter wind howled. Elise tended a small stove, warming the room and boiling water. Denny stared into the dim light, replaying the moment Lucky Lily tore apart. He heard again the sound of shearing metal, felt the violent spin of the falling tail. Remembered the moment he glimpsed the sky one last time before leaping into the void. The weight of it pressed on him like a physical force. Elise noticed his distant stare. "You should rest," she said. "I'll keep watch." He shook his head. "No, I'm okay." But he wasn't. Night fell. Elise dimmed the lantern, and Denny finally let his eyes close. Sleep came in broken, painful fragments, memories of his crew, of Jack shouting orders, of Sam's laughter, of the sudden silence after the break. He woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat despite the cold. Elise was seated nearby, reading a worn book by the faint glow of the stove. She looked up. Bad dreams? He rubbed his eyes. Something like that. Oh, she nodded knowingly. War dreams. Just before dawn, distant gunfire cracked through the air. Elise stiffened. A German patrol, she whispered. They are sweeping the woods again. She extinguished the light and motioned for Denny to follow her. They slipped out the back of the cabin and into the darkness. The forest seemed sharper than before, each shadow a threat. They moved quickly, crouched low, weaving through brambles and hidden trails. Voices echoed in the distance, German commands carried on the wind. Elise pressed her finger to her lips. They ducked behind a fallen tree as two soldiers approached along a nearby path. One smoked a cigarette, the glow a tiny beacon in the dim pre-dawn gloom. Denny held his breath. His heart hammered so loud he feared they would hear it. The soldiers paused, speaking quietly, then moved on. Elise exhaled softly and tugged his sleeve. Come, we must go toward the valley. There are people there who can help you. Partisans. Denny blinked. Resistance. She nodded. Not all Germans support this war. Some fight against it. They continued until they reached a clearing, overlooking a valley shrouded in morning mist. Elise pointed toward a cluster of trees on the far side. Go there. Wait, someone will come. Denny frowned. You're not coming with me? Elise shook her head. If I go, they will notice my absence. And they will question me, but you still have a chance. He didn't want to leave her. She had saved his life, risked everything. Elise, thank you, he said quietly. She smiled, a faint, sad smile. Just promise me one thing, she said. If you make it home, tell people what happened here. Tell them about the sky full of fire. He nodded. Before he could say more, she stepped back into the trees and vanished like a ghost. Left alone, Denny moved toward the far tree line. His body ached with every step. He waited in the clearing, scanning the mist for movement. Minutes felt like hours. Then, from the fog, a figure emerged. Then another. They wore civilian clothes, long coats, armbands marked with a small symbol he didn't recognize. One man approached, hands open. You are the American, he asked in broken English. Denny nodded. Name's Rourke. The man gestured for him to follow. Come, we take you to shelter. Germans search everywhere today. As Denny walked with them into the deeper forest trails, he couldn't help looking back toward where Elise had vanished. He whispered a silent hope that she would be safe. Then he followed the partisans deeper into the unknown. Unaware that his survival would soon depend on a dangerous mission, a deception plan, and a fragile thread of trust between strangers bound together only by war. The partisans led Denny through twisting woodland paths, their pace steady and unhurried, as if they had spent half their lives navigating these forests. The leader, a broad-shouldered man named Merrick, kept glancing back to ensure Denny could keep up. They eventually reached a hidden bunker dug into a slope and covered with cut branches and snow. Inside, the air was musty but warm, lit by a single oil lamp. A few men sat sharpening knives or cleaning captured weapons, their weary eyes lifting to study the stranger in torn American flight gear. Marek motioned toward a stool. Sit, he said. You are safe here. For now. Denny lowered himself slowly, feeling every bruise from the fall. A young partisan named Anton placed a tin cup in his hands. Hot broth, thin but comforting. Denny drank gratefully. We heard your plane go down, Marek said, leaning against the table. Big explosion. Sky lit up. Many Germans went to search.
Oh.
Denny nodded grimly. We were hit hard. Lost engines. Lost the tail. Lost my crew. His voice broke, unexpected on the last word. The bunker fell silent, the men watching him with quiet sympathy. War had stolen from all of them. Loss needed no translation. After a moment, Marek spoke. "We have helped airmen before. British, American, even a Canadian once. We moved them through the valley, across the ridge, to a safe farmhouse. From there, to the river and beyond the patrol lines. But not today. Too many Germans? They search everywhere." Denny rubbed his face. "So what do we do?" Marek exchanged a glance with Anton. "We wait, and we prepare. They will come close to this area soon. We must be ready to move." Time passed slowly in the bunker. Denny drifted between restless naps and the dizzying clarity of survival. The men spoke quietly in their native tongue, glancing often toward the entrance. The storm clouds outside began to thicken, casting the forest in a muted, oppressive gray. When night fell, Marek knelt beside Denny. "We go soon," he said. "At night, Germans do not see so well, and they do not like to chase ghosts in the dark." They left the bunker silently, the cold biting harder than before. Snowflakes drifted down, muffling every sound. Marek led the group along an old hunting trail. Anton kept close to Denny's side, whispering directions whenever the path grew treacherous. In the distance, the faint glow of lanterns marked German patrols sweeping the woods. The sight tightened Denny's chest. He remembered the bright glow of Lucky Lily's burning fuselage, remembered the haunting descent of the tail section, spinning like a broken wing of some dying giant. He shook the image away. After nearly an hour, the group reached the edge of a ravine where a small bridge spanned a frozen creek. Marek held up a hand to stop them. Ahead, dim lantern light illuminated two German soldiers huddled under a tarp, rifles resting across their laps. "We go around," Anton whispered. But Marek shook his head. "Too long. Patrol behind us." He studied the guards, weighing options. Then he turned to Denny. "Can you run?" Denny blinked. "Run," Marek nodded. "We distract. You cross, fast, into the trees. They chase us, not you." Denny's stomach tightened. "You sure about this?" Marek shrugged with a small, almost amused snort. "Nothing in war is sure, but better than waiting to be found." Before Denny could argue, Marek darted toward the left flank, Anton toward the right. They kicked snow, snapped branches, shouting taunts in German-accented voices. The guards snapped awake, startled, grabbing rifles. One fired wildly into the darkness, the muzzle flash ripping through the night like a tiny bolt of lightning. "Go!" Anton shouted. Denny ran. His legs burned, his breath forming clouds that trailed behind him. He sprinted across the narrow bridge, boots slipping on the frost-slick boards. A shot cracked past his shoulder, splintering wood. He didn't look back. He dove into the trees on the far side, rolling painfully before scrambling to his feet and pushing deeper into the forest. Behind him, Anton and Marek yelled louder, drawing the soldiers away with well-timed shouts and purposeful noise. For a moment, Denny feared the Germans might catch them, but the shouts faded. Swallowed by the night, he kept running until his lungs threatened to rip themselves apart. Finally, he collapsed behind a thick cluster of pines, gasping for air. Snow blanketed the forest floor, muffling the world around him, making everything feel distant and unreal. He didn't know if the partisans had escaped. He didn't know if they would ever find him again. But he knew he couldn't stay here. He rose slowly and continued into the forest alone. Hours passed. The storm thickened, turning the world into a swirling white labyrinth. Eventually, through the haze of falling snow, Denny spotted a faint light, warm, golden, like a lantern glowing from a farmhouse window. He hesitated. It could be friendly. It could be fatal. But he had no strength left to wander aimlessly. He approached cautiously, circling wide until he had a clear view of the building, a small stone cottage with smoke rising gently from the chimney. He crept closer, ready to run if necessary. As he neared the window, he saw an elderly couple eating supper in silence. Their faces were tired, lined from years of hardship, but not cruel. They didn't wear German uniforms. They didn't carry weapons. They looked like farmers caught in a war they never asked for. Denny tapped lightly on the doorframe, The couple froze. The man reached for a poker near the stove, lifting it defensively as the door creaked open. Denny raised his hands and whispered, "Please, I'm American. I'm not here to hurt you." For a long moment, the man's eyes narrowed, trying to judge truth from deception. Then the woman stood, studying Denny's torn uniform. She saw the American flag patch barely clinging to his sleeve, saw the exhaustion in his face, and gently touched her husband's arm. "He is no German," she murmured. "He is a child of the war." The man slowly lowered the poker. They let him inside. Warmth washed over Denny like a wave. The smell of stew, the soft crackle of the fire, the simple wooden tablet felt like stepping into another world. The woman guided him to a chair. The man fetched a blanket and draped it around his shoulders. They spoke little, but their kindness needed no words. After a few minutes, the man finally asked, "Your plane?" "Shot down," Denny whispered. "My crew. I don't know if any survived." The old man nodded solemnly. "War takes too much." They gave him food, water, and a place by the fire. He drifted into an exhausted sleep, wrapped in the blanket, listening to the soft murmur of the couple's voices. It was the first moment of true safety he had felt since the sky fell apart above Germany. He woke before dawn, compelled by instinct rather than sound. The cottage was quiet. The couple slept in the next room. Snow still drifted outside the window. He stood, feeling the weight of his survival settle heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't stay. If the Germans discovered the couple had sheltered him, they would suffer for it. He scribbled a note in shaky handwriting, "Thank you. I won't forget what you did." He left it on the table beside a few US dollars he had kept in his pocket, worthless here. But the gesture mattered. Before stepping outside, he paused at the door. He whispered a silent prayer for the farmer's safety, then slipped back into the cold dawn. He moved through the forest, following a distant memory of Marek's instructions, south toward the ridgeline, then west until he hit a frozen river. If the partisans survived, they would search for him near the crossing. If not, he would face the journey alone. Hours later, as the sun fought through the clouds, he reached the ridge. From the crest, he could see the valley stretching wide below snow-covered fields, smoke from distant chimneys, and the faint silhouette of German patrols moving like dark insects across the landscape. And beyond it all, far to the west, a ribbon of silver ice that could only be the river, he began the slow descent. Bracing himself for whatever came next, he didn't get far. A whistle cut the air behind him, a sharp, piercing sound. Denny froze, every muscle ready to spring. "Rourke." A voice called. He turned. Anton and Marek emerged from the trees, bruised, scraped, but alive. Relief flooded Denny so hard, he almost fell. Marek grinned faintly. "You run fast," he said. "Good. We will need that." They motioned for him to follow. "Come," Anton said. "The river waits. And maybe your way home." Denny took one last look at the valley, then stepped toward them, toward hope, toward whatever future lay ahead. But the men aboard Black Swan did not have time to grieve. The Germans were coming again. The silhouette of a lone FW-190 reappeared beneath the cloud line, gliding like a hunter that refused to leave a wounded animal alone. O'Hara saw it first, screaming over the interphone that the fighter was making another pass, low and climbing. The bomber's waist gunners swung their guns as far down as they could, but the angle was blind. The 190 was aiming to tear the belly out like he'd done to so many others in the 91st Bomb Group. "He's gonna rake us from under," O'Hara yelled. "I got no shot." The fear in his voice made Miller react on instinct. If the fighter was coming from below, the only guns with any hope of hitting it were the ball turret guns, but their gunner was gone with the tail section. "Pilot," Miller shouted. "We're gonna drop a wing hard." Reynolds didn't argue. He trusted his co-pilot the same way a man trusts a rope dangling over a cliff. He banked the heavy B-17 so sharply, the surviving tail structure groaned like an old ship twisting apart. For a moment, the bomber rolled to nearly 40 degrees, a suicidal angle for a wounded fortress. But it was enough. O'Hara finally saw the 190. in his sights and let out a string of fire that carved sparks into the fighter's canopy. The German pulled away in surprise, engine coughing smoke as tracers stitched the underside of his fuselage, then disappeared into the whitening clouds. The brief victory felt strange, hollow like killing a wolf only after it had already torn off a limb. No one cheered. They didn't have the heart for it. Sergeant Lewis's empty seat echoed through the airplane like a ghost leaning over every man's shoulder. The bomber shook again as wind tore across the broken rear fuselage. The tail fabric fluttered violently. The entire vertical stabilizer looked like a cracked tooth ready to snap. Reynolds kept the bomber level with both hands white on the yoke. Miller monitored the controls, watching the trim tabs vibrating themselves toward failure. "She's not going to make England like this," Miller muttered. Reynolds didn't disagree. "Then we make it as far as she'll take us," the pilot said softly. "We owe Lewis that much." In the radio compartment, Harris desperately tried to angle the long antenna to reach the nearest friendly frequency. Static roared like a storm in his headphones. The damaged electrics flickered. Finally, between the bursts of interference, he caught a faint Allied signal. "This is Black Swan," he transmitted, voice trembling. "Tail section gone?" "Repeat, tail section gone. One gunner lost. Fuel leaking. Hydraulic failure. Request guidance." He waited. Silence answered him, and for a moment Harris wondered if he was already talking to the dead. Then a voice broke through, distant but unmistakably American. "Black Swan, this is Whistler Control. Copy your damage. Turn heading 270 and attempt descent to 10,000 feet. We'll guide you to an emergency strip in Belgium if you can hold her together." Belgium. It wasn't England, but it was life. The descent began slowly at first, too slowly. The bomb bay doors were jammed open, and the drag was enormous. The engines strained, coughing smoke from the starboard side, and the Fortress seemed to resist the idea of lowering altitude at all. Like it was afraid falling would finish what the flak had started. Reynolds worked the throttles with the tenderness of a surgeon, adjusting each engine separately to keep the broken bird level. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered to the control column. "Just give me 20 more minutes." O'Hara and Jenkins continued rotating between windows, scanning the sky for more fighters. The Germans could return at any moment, and a crippled bomber at low altitude was a gift they rarely ignored. Wind blew through the rear, bitter cold, carrying flecks of frost that stuck to their jackets. None of them dared sit down. The airplane felt like it could shear apart if anyone shifted their weight wrong. Halfway through their descent, the Fortress lurched violently, as though struck from below. Reynolds instinctively gripped the yoke, then felt it go slack in his hands. The bomber dipped. The nose sank a few degrees, then more. "I'm losing control authority," Reynolds shouted. Miller checked the cables, the trim, the hydraulic gauge, everything he could reach. Nothing had changed. Nothing visibly snapped. But the tail, already wounded, was giving out. With each passing second, the stabilizer twisted further. "She's not gonna hold pitch," Miller yelled. Harris heard the panic and abandoned his radio station long enough to help brace the navigator, whose table had pitched sideways. The bomber was now dropping faster than planned. Too fast. "Feather engine 3, Miller barked. "She's pulling us into a spin." Reynolds complied, feathering the prop to reduce torque, and the airplane steadied slightly. But the altitude was melting away in the altimeter window like ice under a torch. Just then, as if punishment for daring to hope, a shadow cut across the clouds above them. Jenkins spotted it first and swore, "A lone me 109. The German A's had been circling for cripples like a vulture, waiting to finish the dying. He dove hard, sunlight flashing along his guns. Incoming. 6 o'clock, but low," Jenkins shouted. Reynolds fought the controls even as he shouted back, "Keep him off us." But the rear guns were gone. There was nothing left pointing backward but ragged airframe and shreds of canvas. The Fortress was naked. The Me-109 lined up, engines howling. It was the moment every crippled bomber feared death from behind with no shield. But before the fighter opened fire, the air around Black Swan erupted in a thunder of machine gun fire from above. A pair of P-51 Mustangs dropped through the clouds like avenging hawks, guns blazing in perfect unison. Their tracer fire ripped across the Germans' path. The 109 jerked sideways, trailing smoke, banking hard to escape. One Mustang followed it with a diving roll. The other slid in front of the fortress, waggling its wings like a hand reaching out to pull a friend from a pit. O'Hara actually laughed in disbelief. "Angels," he whispered. "We got angels on our side." The Mustang pilot's voice crackled through Harris's radio headset a moment later. "Black Swan, this is Red Tail 2. We're taking you home. Just stay in the air and don't fall apart on us, you hear?" Reynolds almost cried at the sound. Miller wiped his eyes, pretending it was just cold wind leaking into the cockpit. The Mustangs flew so close their wingtips looked near enough to touch, shepherding the broken giant across the sky. Below them, the Belgian countryside unfolded snow-dusted fields, dark forests, crooked farmhouses. Somewhere in that patchwork of land was an emergency strip carved out by Allied engineers. Whistler Control guided them by radio, vector by vector. The fortress descended like a wounded beast, limping towards shelter, shaking with every breath of wind. The tail's remaining frame rattled like bones in a box. The altimeter ticked downward. The engine sputtered. The Mustang escorts flew tighter. Finally, the emergency airstrip came into view, a rough dirt runway lined with makeshift flare markers. Engineers waving panels, ambulances waiting like pale ghosts beside the path. Reynolds locked his jaw. "This is it, boys. Stand by." The fortress dropped lower, lower still. The gear indicator lights flickered, refusing to turn green. Miller pumped the emergency hydraulic lever by hand, muscles burning, sweat freezing on his brow. "Command. Come on." With a metallic groan audible through the entire frame, the landing gear finally locked into place. At 40 feet, the tail almost snapped. Jenkins saw it first and shouted a warning, but there was nothing anyone could do. The stabilizer cracked upward, bending at a sick angle. Reynolds used every ounce of strength he had to keep the nose level. Pressing one rudder pedal so hard his leg felt like it would tear away. The wheels kissed the dirt runway, bounced then slammed down again. The bomber shuddered violently, the left wheel skidding, the right nearly folding. Dirt blasted across the fuselage windows as the B-17 screamed across the strip, engines roaring at idle. The tail section tore free entirely with a wrenching metallic scream, sliding across the ground in a spray of broken wood and metal. The rest of the bomber fishtailed, spun half a turn, finally skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust and smoke. Silence. No engine noise. No wind through a shattered fuselage. Just the stillness of a giant finally collapsing after carrying its crew farther than it ever should have managed. For several long moments, no one moved. Then O'Hara began to sob quietly, not for himself, but for Lewis. "He should have been here," he whispered. "He should have touched down with us." Medics rushed the wreck, prying open the forward hatch, pulling the men out one by one. Reynolds refused help until every member of his surviving crew was clear. When he finally stepped onto the dirt, he looked back at the ruin of the tail lying separate from the rest of the bomber, the place where Lewis had made his final stand. A Mustang pilot jogged over, helmet tucked under his arm. "You boys are the toughest sons of bitches I've ever seen in the sky," he said. Reynolds nodded, unable to speak. The pilot placed a hand on his shoulder. "We saw the tail go. You kept her flying anyway. That's something nobody's going to forget." Reynolds looked out over the shattered pieces of what had once been Black Swan, the fortress that had carried them through fire and hell more than once. And though his heart was breaking, he knew the truth. The bomber had borne its last weight with honor. It had brought its crew home -1. But even Lewis, lost to the sky, had not gone in vain. His courage had bought them minutes they should never have had.